Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Flying by the Seat of Our Pants Winter Bird Festival in Morro Bay. And it's a lovely day out here in Morro Bay, and we wish you were here, but you know what? We're all together on Zoom. So today's presentation is by Kelly Vanden Heuvel, and she's going to talk about Pacific Wildlife Care and their amazing mission. And she might even bring in a special guest. We'll see. So a few announcements before we get started. First of all, we will be recording this message, this whole video. So in a few days or so, it will be up on our website. We'll figure that out after the program is over, but look on our website for that. If you're familiar with Zoom, you'll know there's lots of different functions on Zoom, but we're pretty much turning all of those off because, you know, when you have hundreds of people in the same Zoom room, and if they're not muted, it can be a zoo. So we're turning off the mute. And also there is that raise your hand function. And here's the reality. We're not going to recognize any raised hands. So you don't even need to bother about pushing your hand raised because we're not going to recognize it. Now the chat function is something we will use in the last half of the program. And the chat function will be open up basically for your questions of Kelly. So if you'd like to know something, then you can put it into the chat and make sure you chat to everyone, not just to one person or another, and we'll get those at the end. Finally, just to let you know, we wish you were here in person, but we're doing our best with this Zoom festival, but we have incurred a lot of expenses having to cancel our festival right at the last moment. So we are looking for donations. Yes, all of these are free, but if you're able and can make a donation, we would love that. We would really appreciate it. Because if we're going to start another festival next year, it's going to take some seed money to make that happen. So if you want to see an in-person festival, and if you are able, you can make donations several ways. The old-fashioned way of writing a check and mailing it in. If you know where a checkbook is and how to do that and can find a stamp, that's one way. The modern way is to hold your phone up to the QR codes on the last slide, and you can donate either by Venmo or by PayPal. Or if you would rather, just go to the Morro Bay Winter Bird Festival website, and there will be a link, and you can click right on that. So now we are on to our program, and I'd like to introduce Kelly Vanden Heuvel, and I just realized I left her biography page down in my printer in another room. But Kelly has been involved in the Winter Bird Festival for years and years as the program coordinator, but she's also been a volunteer for Pacific Wildlife Care. And she's got a unique situation. She's got a ranch outside of Cayucas with some property and huge flight cages. So she's able to rehab, especially some of those large raptors, and get them back up and running and ready for release. So I'm really excited to hear Kelly today talk about the work of Pacific Wildlife Care. Every community has a little wildlife care organization, and ours in Morro Bay is really quite robust. So she's going to talk about that and maybe bring along a guest. In her spare time, when she's not rehabbing birds or volunteering for something or other, she sells real estate here in Morro Bay. So if you want to buy a house, you can go check out Kelly's website and buy a house from here. So that's it for the announcements. Kelly, if you're up and running, let's go.
Okay, I think I am. Thank you, Chris. I want to give a special shout out to Chris and Bob and our entire board for putting together a last minute Zoom festival, because it was a hard decision we all had to make this last weekend. And here we are doing a Zoom festival just a few days later. So thanks, you guys. You did an awesome job. And I am really proud to be here representing Pacific Wildlife Care. I'm a founding member of the organization. I've been with the group since 1984 when we started, almost 40 years ago. And basically our mission from the start and continues on is to rehabilitate and release back into the wild sick, orphaned, and injured wild animals. So we don't do domestic animals, we don't do marine mammals, but we do all native birds and mammals that you will find here on the Central Coast. So thank you all for being here and being a part of this. I would like to start with a short video about our organization and then continue on in more depth about how we started and where we are today. So I think Bob can make that video start.
For over 30 years, Pacific Wildlife Care has been a community educator and the first responder for distressed wildlife in San Luis Obispo County. County Animal Services, Harbor Patrol, state parks, city police, the County Sheriff's Department, and animal shelters all rely on Pacific Wildlife Care to rescue injured, sick, and orphaned wildlife. Anyone can call 805-543-WILD for reassurance, answers to wildlife questions, help with rescue, and advice for living compatibly with local wildlife. We are the only organization in the county providing these services. Through our educational outreach program, we teach young and old alike to value and respect wildlife and the environment we share with them. Our Wildlife Rehabilitation Center in Morro Bay is a refuge for orphaned and injured wildlife. Human activity has had a negative impact on many of the animals that are brought to the center. We see grebes and pelicans covered in oil, birds and mammals hit by automobiles, seabirds entangled by fishing line and pierced by fishing hooks, hawks caught in barbed wire fences, maimed by gunshots or electrocuted, songbirds caught by cats, eagles and turkey vultures lead poisoned by bullet-ridden carrion or poisoned by rodenticides, mammal babies orphaned by trapped parents, and the list goes on. The Pacific Wildlife Care Center takes in all wildlife, treats them humanely, and our volunteers work tirelessly to try and return them back to their native habitat in the wild. Our on-site rehabilitators and veterinarian are highly skilled professionals with many years of experience and training, and are committed to providing the highest standard of care in the field of wildlife rehabilitation. They make sure every animal at the center receives a complete physical exam and treatment plan, adequate amounts of fluid and nourishment appropriate to the species, proper housing and caging, and follow-up care and pre-release conditioning. Over the past 3 years, Pacific Wildlife Care has cared for more than 8,000 animals. We provide life-saving medications, food, veterinary services, and supportive care costing over $340,000 annually. Volunteers donate over 27,000 hours of their time each year. Wildlife is important to our community. Thousands of visitors come to the Central Coast each year to visit our national bird sanctuaries and delight in our native wildlife. All of the creatures are important to keeping the ecosystem in balance and are as critical to our way of life as air, water, and sun. We believe it takes an entire community working in partnership to preserve and ensure the humane treatment, rehabilitation, and care of our wildlife. Pacific Wildlife Care does not receive government funding and relies on donations and memberships. For more information on how you can donate, join, or volunteer, please visit us online at www.pacificwildlifecare.org. You can also find us on Facebook.
So that's an overview of our organization and what we do. We've been doing it for a long time in this county, as I said, since 1984. We've come a long way since then. There was 5 of us in the beginning, and I think we have upwards of over 1,000 people that volunteer for us. We also have a full-time veterinarian on staff that is critical in our operation in assessing wild animals and deciding if they're eligible to be released back into the wild. We do surgeries and we do active rehab at the center. Plus, as Chris mentioned earlier, there's a flight cage out here on my property where we condition larger birds of prey after they've had their initial treatment before they are released back to the wild. So all that being said, even though our main goal is to release back to the wild, there are certain situations where animals cannot be released to the wild. Denali is one of those situations. So he is a red-tailed hawk. I've had him for 11 years now, since he was a baby, and he was born with a congenital eye disorder that limits his sight. So it's like cataracts in people, where if he is looking out, he would be like looking through a mini blind, basically. So obviously he would not be able to hunt in the wild with his situation. He was found by some people up in the Sacramento area, and they were well-meaning individuals who took him in, decided to try to care for him themselves, but realized that they shouldn't have a bird of prey. It's illegal. So they took him to a local vet who basically discovered what his problem was, and that is the eye issue. And he's also somewhat imprinted, as you can see. He's used to being around people. So those were bad, situations for a bird of prey to be put back into the wild. He would not survive. So he was evaluated and deemed to be an eligible educational ambassador. He wants to show you his red tail right now. He loves to show off. And so he is one of 12 educational animals that we have with Pacific Wildlife Care. And what we do, is take our birds and mammals to schools, Rotary clubs, churches, events to teach people about these wild animals and their importance in our environment. And it's really effective. I have kids that I brought Denali to their schools when they were young, and now they're adults, and they approach me and they're in biology or other areas of the environment because they learned about the importance of birds and mammals and other, just taking care of our environment in general. So a little bit about red-tailed hawks. They're pretty common here on the Central Coast and throughout California, from actually all the way Canada down to South America. And there are various color morphs with red-tailed hawks, as with a lot of raptors. So Denali has the light chest, the dark back and head, and the red tail, which they all have. But if you go to a place like maybe in the desert, you might see lighter color morphs of red-tailed hawks. In areas that are heavily wooded, you might see darker morphs. And the one distinguishing feature, again, is that red tail, which they all have. They also have, which is kind of interesting since he's in this position, this round circular pattern on the back of their head. I don't know if you can all see that, but it's almost like a halo. And if you think about it, if the bird's out in the wild and flying and a bigger bird was behind it, maybe a golden eagle or another big bird of prey, that halo pattern might look like an eye to a larger bird and make a bird like this appear larger than he actually is. So it's just one of those possibilities that nature came up with to protect him in the wild. One of the things also I want to mention about raptors in general, females are always 30% larger in size than the males. And that's probably due to the fact that they're the ones that incubate the eggs. So Denali's he's about almost 3 pounds. A female could be, 4 pounds, maybe a little bit more. He's a bit robust. You might notice his chest here. He eats well and is well taken care of. So we have to watch his weight constantly so that he doesn't get too big, because that could be a problem for him if he were overweight. And going back to Pacific Wildlife Care just a little bit, and to kind of touch back on what was said in the video, most of the animals we get come to us because of a man-caused problem. So it's not like we're just out in the wild collecting animals that would otherwise die. Most of the birds and mammals that come to us have been injured by something, hit by a car, shot by a gun, poisoned by rodenticides. Some eat lead, which was mentioned in the video, which is a horrible, horrible death to these birds and mammals as well. So almost every situation, for the most part, is because of a man-caused situation. Here on the Central Coast, Cayucas, Morro Bay, we get a lot of seabirds. And so many of those have fishing line wrapped around them, hooks in their beaks, oiled, birds. So we do our best to treat these animals, care for them, and get them back into the wild as soon as we possibly can. We're very successful at that. Last year, we had almost 2,500 patients wild animals come into our center. We have a fairly high release rate with those numbers. Obviously, some are injured in such a way or sick that we can't help them. But for the most part, we're able to. So we do have a center in Morro Bay. It's been a temporary spot for us. We've had it now, I believe, about 10 years. And prior to that, we all just worked from our homes. In our backyards. I did in the beginning everything from pelicans to raccoons to possums to seagulls and birds of prey. So now we're much more professional in the sense that we have a center. We have people that specialize with certain animals. And so it works out very well that we can, care for those animals as we know how to. So let's see what else about PWC. So yes, our property in Morro Bay is, we're going to be losing here in the next year plus, maybe 2 years max. We've rented the property from a local power plant basically, and now we need to give it back. So about 2 years ago, PWC purchased some land on Buckley Road in San Luis Obispo. It's a large parcel that is flat, and we plan to rebuild our wildlife center bigger and better than ever. So that's in the works. Like the Bird Festival, we are volunteer based. We rely on donations and grants. So we have a big road ahead of us. The center is going to be very costly, millions of dollars to complete. So we're in the process of a capital campaign right now to generate revenue. If you want to find out more about that, you can go to our website, which is pacificwildlifecare.org. And that is something that will help us for the future, and we'll have a top of the line center when we finally get it completed, which will hopefully be in the next few years. I do want to open up this presentation to questions, if that's appropriate, Chris and Bob. I know there's oftentimes questions that come up, and I will real quickly say, I mentioned that I've had Denali for 11 years. And I've asked this a lot, how long do red-tailed hawks live? And in the wild, 12, 14 years would be a long life for a bird of prey. 30% die within the first year because they don't know how to hunt properly. They become emaciated and they die. So in the wild, it's tough out there. If they survive that first year, they still have other problems, including all the things I mentioned earlier with rodenticides and lead and just nature. It can be tough. So in captivity, a bird like Denali could live to be 35 years old or more. That's the oldest one I'm aware of in captivity for a red-tailed hawk is 35. I do know, nope, he's going to pose again. I have a great horned owl also, and she's 21. I recently found out there's a great horned owl at the San Francisco Zoo that is 50. So again, in captivity, taken care of well, fed every day, they can live a lot longer than they would otherwise do so in the wild.
Good. Kelly, let me just jump in here for a second. That's an amazing bird. And what I want to announce to everybody online, there's about 150 people online. Now's a good time to write some questions. We are going to open the chat room. And so if you have a question for Kelly about red-tailed hawks, about raptors in general, Kelly's also done a lot of rehab of eagles as well as hawks. Maybe you can ask her if she's ever raised any baby hawks. I don't know if you mentioned that or not. And maybe something as simple as, what are some of the field marks for a red-tailed hawk? They might be common, but how do I know it from a rough-legged hawk or a Swainson's or a ferruginous or something else? And so if you've got questions about hawks or about wildlife or what you should do if you find some wildlife, go ahead and start writing those questions in the chat. And when we see them, I will transfer them up to Kelly. Kelly, don't worry about your chat because you've got a bird on your hand. Okay. I don't know if you can look at your chat or not, but I will look at it too just to make sure. So this is a good time to write your questions in chat about wild animal rehab. Okay, we've got a couple of these questions, but before we get to that question, Kelly, do you know any of the field marks for a red-tailed hawk? How do we know that hawk we're looking for is a red-tailed?
Chris, I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that because I'm not real good at that. Obviously the way I can tell is just, I don't know the field marks real well, but the red tail is a very distinguishing feature of the red-tailed hawk. They all have it after their first year. If you look, a lot of people ask me the difference between a red-shouldered hawk and a red-tailed hawk. The red shoulders have a very red breast and black and white striping on their back, and they're smaller in size. They're also, these guys catch their food with their talons. They will fly down on their prey and catch it and then use their beak to tear the food apart. Sometimes with the red shoulder hawks, they will actually catch them in the air. They eat a lot of birds. And so they're just a little more hyper, let's say, than the red-tailed hawk. And again, smaller in size.
Okay. Really good. Thank you very much. And maybe we'll have birders come on here to give us some hints on some of those field marks for a red-tailed hawk. We've got a question here, and one of those is, do you band any of the birds that are released back into the wild?
We were doing that a little bit. So we do have paper bands we use at the center. The problem is they tend to fall off, or the birds pull them off, because I've had a few in my flight cage and they end up on the ground. We had one of our leaders in the festival, Greg Smith, was helping me band birds for a while that I had in my flight cage. And it was helpful because we did find a couple of great horned owls a few months later that had been released that were needed help again. So it was helpful for us to know and find, a bird that we knew we had rehabbed.
Great. Okay, if other people have questions, now is a good time to write them. And when you write your questions in the chat function down below, make sure you're chatting to everybody and not just directly to me, but to everybody. And that way we can all look at them. As for field marks for a red-tailed hawk, I think there's some darkness right here. That's a pretty important thing. And somebody can maybe, I call it the armpit, but the armpit would really be a little bit underneath, but it's like up on the shoulder. And maybe we can see those dark marks on his shoulder. You see that? And that's good. And then, like you said, they have red tails, which is pretty obvious, except when they're juveniles, and then they're not red, and that kind of throws you off. They're kind of gray and black banded. Okay, let me see if I've got any other chats. I don't see any other questions in the chat. So I
can tell you a couple quick facts again on PWC. You asked a moment ago, Chris, what does a person do if they find a sick, injured, or orphaned animal? And our hotline number is 805-543-WILD. So that's a good number just to write down, put in your phone if you live in our county. And there are usually typically wildlife groups in all counties throughout California and the United States. But 543-WILD is our local number. And what we tell people is if it's safe and you can take the animal out of a bad situation, using a blanket or gloves, put it in a box in a cool, warm, not hot, not cold, dark, quiet place. You don't want it in a room with dogs barking or, a room that's too hot or cold. Just quiet, dark, until someone can respond and pick the bird up and bring it to our center. So that's important. Oftentimes I get calls, with a bird or a baby deer on the side of the road. That's not necessarily a safe situation to put yourself in. So, in that case, call 543-WILD. We have people that do rescue that are trained and can help the animal out and not put themselves in harm's way.
Good. Thanks a lot. Some people are saying they can't seem to drop down and chat with everyone. They're just chatting directly with me, and that's fine. You can chat with me directly. We will try to see if we can affect those changes, those settings. One person says, I'm assuming that most birds and animals treated by PWC are from the marine environment. Is it an issue to be moved inland to the San Luis Obispo? So if you find a coastal red-tailed, do you move them into Sacramento or Kernville or something?
Well, our center being in San Luis isn't that far from the ocean. We do have a lot of seabirds that come in, a good percentage, but we also have birds, and mammals that come from all over the county. So it's not going to make much of a difference. We'll still be getting those same birds. We have pools that are set up at our current center, and then we're going to have, the same thing at the new one, pools that are, the right temperature for the specific species, and a full-on setup that enables us to care for every single wild animal that comes in and it matches their environment.
Good. And I think one of the important things there is some of those birds that are seabirds, their feet need special care, so you can't just throw them in a cage. They've got to be in a water situation, and so you have to have just the right water, the right kind of netting to hold them and treat them so you don't injure their feet. Can you mention anything about that?
Yeah, we do have these for the pelagic birds. It's kind of we've learned this from other organizations, but like a netting, like you said, that they sit on, because they can't just sit on the bottom of a crate. And so when they're in intensive care, they're in a special seabird room that has these crates with the special netting on the bottom that they actually sit in. There's also small pools, and then outside we have the larger pools once they're ready to make that next step and go out, outside into a big pool. So it's kind of a gradual thing. Just like our birds of prey, they start at the center, they may have a surgery, they're in ICU, and then eventually they send birds out my way that need to be conditioned in the flight cage. So our flight cage is almost 100 feet. And it enables birds to condition, because they've been in a cage, for some time being rehabilitated. So they need to fly, and they need to live prey hunt if they're younger birds. So we teach them all of that here.
Good. Yeah, Sandy had a question. She wonders, how big is that flight cage? You just mentioned it. And how do the birds live in there? Or how many birds live in there? What's life like in a flight cage?
Yeah, so that's interesting. At one time, this was too many, but we had a run on golden eagles, and I had 3 in there at the same time. It worked. It was tight quarters and not ideal, but it was all we had at the time. We will have a large raptor flight cage at our new center, but I've also had, up to, 5 or 6 great horned owls at the same time, red-tailed hawks, 3 or 4. They're able to fly. There's various perches at different heights, and then there's a corner they can turn around in. So it gives them everything they need to learn how to perch and fly and land. The one thing we can't do, and we've been in situations where we've had to make it work, is you can't have an owl and a hawk in the same flight. They would not get along well. So we've had to curtain off the flight cage and separate it, but then they don't have the proper, flying space that they really need.
Right. Good. So somebody's asking about sounds. Somebody's hearing a little sound in your place, and then somebody else talked about the sound of a red-tailed hawk, and I think the red-tailed hawk goes something like, which is essentially the call in all TV movies for bald eagles, golden eagles, falcons, or vultures. Or whatever, the common red-tailed hawk sound is the classic sound for all large, scary birds of prey.
Exactly.
What else is that noise going on behind you?
So we do birds of all sizes, and this is a domestic bird that I raise. It's an owl finch, and I'm hand feeding these, so they need to be fed every hour with a syringe. But that launches in, it's a good segue to what we do at the center, which is baby bird season is just about to start. And when baby bird season happens, we have a whole room devoted to baby birds. And we have volunteers that come in from 6 a.m. They stay till 7 p.m. hand feeding baby birds, which need to eat like every 45 minutes. So we've got some excellent volunteers. They train them to do that so that they know what they're doing and care for. And baby bird season seems to go on, feels like it goes on forever, but it's really just a few months. of that. And those are all the smaller birds. We do get a lot of hawks that come in and owls that either a tree's been cut down with a nest in it, or maybe a baby's fallen from a nest and we can't re-nest it for some reason. But when those birds come in, we're dealing with a lot of babies, raptors as well.
Somebody just asked a question about rescuing baby birds. Are there times you should maybe not rescue a baby bird and leave it alone? When should you pick it up and when should you leave it alone?
Well, that's a good question. So a lot of times when birds are fledging, when they're first coming out of the nest, they are learning to fly. So people oftentimes say, oh no, we've got to rescue it, and they bring it to us. And basically we've just kidnapped a little bird from its parents and it didn't need to be saved. The one thing that does happen though is if there's a cat in the yard potentially or some other animal, the bird could be injured. So if you see a bird like that is fledged, a young bird in your yard, ideally, if you can make sure it's as safe as can be, it's going to start branching and getting up off the ground pretty quickly. So the parents teach it, they encourage it to get off, the ground and start flying and learning to eat on its own. But they really should be left with their parents if at all possible. And with the bigger birds, the raptors, we do have a re-nesting program where we have one of our volunteers goes up high in these trees and they'll put it, even if the nest has fallen or been blown out or the tree was cut, they can put a basket up there and put the babies back in it, and the parents will continue to feed the babies.
Sounds like the kind of job for just a really specific skill set, and someone who really has that love. We've got lots of questions coming in now. Marcel Bacula says PWC saw 2,500 cases in 2021, 196 different species. And somebody is asking, what in the world is a crayons, and is your bird hot? It looks like it's pitching a little bit.
Yeah, we both are. We're in my greenhouse because it's really windy and cold outside, and it's heating up in here. But it's about 80, so we're okay for a little bit longer. So crayons is a technique used, especially if there's not a flight cage available, to condition birds, primarily birds of prey. You attach basically jesses and a long leash. I think it's about 100 feet. It's probably longer than 100 feet. You let the bird fly. It goes, a long ways out. It's probably more like 300 feet. And then it goes the end of the rope, and then we collect it and do that 10 or 12 times, a few times a week. And then that bird conditions without having to be in a large flight cage.
Right.
So
okay.
That's crayonsing.
Okay. Thank you. And so that's how you work up the muscles of the of the raptors before they're released. By the way, are you like the only wildlife care around, or does every county have one? And do you have to have a license, or can anybody do this who feels like it? Are there some like in the Eastern Sierra, or there's some in Ojai? Are we the only place that does this, or do other places do it?
No, there are, almost every county does have a rehab facility, and we're all part of a larger organization so that we can get information and have resources and people to bounce things off of. But it's pretty common, with most larger counties, you'll find a rehab facility or organization caring for wild animals.
Great, thank you.
Great.
And again, the number, if we find an animal in our area, we call 805. What's the rest of it?
543-WILD, WILD.
I think I could remember that. 805, like the beer, 543-WILD. Okay, good.
Yes. And our website, again, is pacificwildlifecare.org. You can find out a ton of information on there about our organization, how you can donate if you choose, how you can volunteer, and things like that.
Perfect. And again, licensing is required to do this, right? You can't just do it when you feel like it.
We're licensed by Fish and Game. We have a permit to do wildlife rehab. For educational birds, we have a separate permit through Fish and Wildlife Services. And our birds are required, and our mammals, to do 12 hours a year. That's part of our agreement of education. So that's, a talk a month ideally. And that enables us to keep our permit. And then they also come out and check our facilities and make sure that we have adequate housing and proper sizes for our enclosures.
Good. Bob has an important question. He wants to know, how tired is your left arm?
It's getting tired. It's, the bird's only less than 3 pounds, but after a while you can feel the weight. 3 pounds after 45 minutes. Yeah.
Great. Someone asked, let's see, this is Sandy asked, do you get birds who are stressed by photographers? That's an interesting question. Is there a way you can tell you are harming the birds, such as owls?
Just my experience with our educational ambassadors, everyone always is, polite enough to ask if they can take a photo. Certainly doesn't stress out our educational birds. However, I have seen, I don't know, in the wild, it's not really going to make any difference because you're not that close. So I would say no.
But if you're maybe crashing through the bushes to get a covey of quail up to get them in flight, that's maybe not the best ethics for bird photography.
Probably not. Yeah, for many reasons. Exactly.
And that's the same for using calls and things, and we've heard some of those in other places. Well, we are going to close down in a couple minutes, but let me give a couple of closing remarks, if you don't mind. And those closing remarks are, first of all, thank you, Kelly, and the hawk who's giving you a little kiss. Thank you for coming and bringing your friend. We really appreciate that. If anybody has a specific question for Kelly, or you want to know more details, you can always email us at our email, which is support@morrobbaybirdfestival.org, or just go on the website and find the contact us, and we'll get to you. I'd like to also remind you that we are accepting donations. Every nonprofit is accepting donations, but right now we're accepting donations in the hope of running another bird festival in person next year. So if you look on your screen, there are 2 of those squiggly QR codes. The one on the left, you can hold your phone up and donate by Venmo if you have that. The one on the right, you can donate by PayPal. Bob thinks it's funny, but people have donated a lot of money, and Venmo has a limit of $299. So if you want to donate more than $299, scroll over to the one on the right and donate by PayPal. Let's see. I have a couple more things. Let's see. We will be closing down the Zoom room in a few minutes and getting ready for our next one. Let me just run through some of our next speakers. The very next speaker I'm really excited about. If you're a bird photographer, this is Advanced Bird Photography by Sarah Killingsworth. This is a double session. So this is 2 hours of serious bird photography. And if you like bird photography, this lady knows how to do it. She's got an article that was just published about suburban bobcats. It was a remarkable article, and she's got some incredible photos there. So she's a published professional bird photographer, and this is going to be advanced bird photography. So that'll be a good one. And right after that, we have Dr. Steve Bessinger, and I think he's from Berkeley, and he's going to be talking about conserving the black rail. Now, some of those little rail birds, they're tough to see. So he's going to talk about the rails and allies and conserving the black rail. After that, Steve Schubert is going to come on. One of my favorite topics, he's going to be talking about peregrine falcons of Morro Rock specifically. Probably he'll touch about peregrines in general, but peregrine falcons of Morro Rock. And guess what? He wrote a book of 50 years of peregrine nesting on Morro Rock. So he knows a thing or two about what's going on our little rock and what's happening with peregrines there. After that, we have Brian Sullivan. He was involved in getting eBird up and going and off the ground, and he is going to be talking about the cutting edge of bird science. He will mention Cornell, but we're going to be discussing several other ways things about the cutting edge of bird science. Finally, our keynote tonight will be John Muir Laws, or as his friends call him, Jack Laws. So he's going to be talking about the 7 habits of happy birders. And he's one of our preeminent nature journaling guys. And so you may find a few tips about nature journaling, maybe a few things on how to draw stuff. And he's an engaging speaker. He normally is a speaker and does public speaking. And for the last couple of years, he's been doing a lot of stuff on Zoom. So he knows how to do a good presentation on Zoom. So we'll see him tonight starting at 5 o'clock. Lots of great things for tomorrow and the day after, but that's it for today. Thanks for coming, everybody. Take a short break. Come back at the top of the hour for Sarah Killingsworth and Advanced Bird Photography. Thanks again, Kelly. Thanks again to your little friend there. Go get some fresh air, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.